Hello, Geshe. Hi,
Hello.
everybody. Thank you, Dalit. Good to be here. Good to see you all. I hope you're all well. Just every now and then, I'd like to remind you that everything was here. We all know for sure how precious this text is, how lucky we are to have the opportunity to study it with Geshe in such depth. So if you feel that you would like to practice generosity, please do so. The link will give you in the chat how to do that from time to time. You might do it on a weekly basis or once a month as you feel, as long as it's comfortable and you can afford it. If not, please feel good about joining us for this precious opportunity. This is the main thing, and we're very happy to meet with you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so let's start, as usual, with some breathing meditation. And then visualize in the space in front of you Buddha Shakyamuni, appearing as a fully ordained monk. Manifestation of your Lama. And a manifestation of the enlightened qualities of a Buddha. And surrounding the Buddha, all the greatly realized masters of India, especially the Nalanda tradition, like Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Chandakirti, and so forth. And likewise surrounding the Buddha are the great Tibetan masters who've preserved the pure teachings to this present day. So gaining the highest realizations themselves. And similarly surrounding the Buddha are masters of the other traditions. Wherever Buddhism took root, the different countries. Who also attain greatest realizations and have preserved the teachings up to this present day. With all of them separable from your Lama. And then think that you're completely surrounded by all sentient beings. Due to ignorance and the other afflictive emotions, like us caught in samsara. Who are just as important for our own spiritual development as the Buddhas are. Who are just like us, wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. And based on that understanding, first generate affectionate love. That is a sense of affection, closeness, and acceptance for all sentient beings. And then aware of the fact that their present mind and body are responsible for all their limitations, all their suffering. Generate great compassion. An affectionate kind of awareness that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from these limiting aggregates and all the sufferings that they give rise to. And especially a wish, may I be able to protect them from their samsaric mind, the samsaric body, and all the other suffering that they give rise to. And that aspiration then turns into strong determination, thinking I will give my very best to free all sentient beings from their limiting aggregates and lead them towards a state of freedom. Freedom from samsara. Since I can only do this realistically once I become enlightened, say in the state of an enlightened Buddha, generate bodhicitta. That is the mind that wishes to become enlightened, driven by great love, compassion for all sentient beings. And it's with this motivation, with this aspiration to become enlightened, that we will also continue to study Chandrakirti's entering into the middle way. And then without letting go of bodhicitta, let's recite the prayers together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay. Now to continue with what I would like you to do for this coming week. Well, we continue to practice the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others. Of course, as part of the practice you've been doing for many months now. So you've really been familiarizing yourself with this mind of enlightenment if you've been, well, continuously doing it. And if for some reason you haven't, well, today is the day to start, or the latest tomorrow. And like I said, to remind you of something or have some reminder. Of course, as part of the practice of the Sava Yoga Bodhicitta that His Holiness has given, the all-encompassing yoga of the mind of enlightenment, combining bodhicitta with the understanding of emptiness, which is also important for the part to do this coming week. And yes, to start in the morning, as His Holiness does himself, as His Holiness teaches us to do in the same way. Start in the morning and then throughout the day, again and again, to generate this mind of enlightenment, to not let go of it. And we have better days, we have worse days, of course, but to continuously start over again, even if we've had a bad day, we didn't remember the mind of enlightenment well, then we always got the next day. And then to continue with this. Of course, to go to bed again with the mind of enlightenment, start the day. So in that way, and generate as often as we can. But more specifically, in order to go through these different techniques, that part of the method of equalizing, exchanging self with others, well, having identified the self-cherishing attitude, the shortcomings of that kind of attitude, that self-centeredness, having understood the qualities of cherishing others, we're still dealing with the part of the meditation that comes to understand that self and others are equal. And we've done so, to remember, first of all, understanding how important sentient beings are for our well-being, physically, mentally, spiritually. Then for 2 weeks, we've been reflecting on the fact that sentient beings, they're equal to us in the sense not just that they're equally important, but that they're on a mental level, on, well, the level of their daily life, they're just like ourselves. However different they may appear, of course, physically, they may appear differently. They come from a different culture, a different background, have a different religion, and so forth. But the driving force, the instinctive urge that they all have in common with us is to find happiness, to live a peaceful, satisfied life, and not to have suffering. And even if they cause trouble for other people, well, the urge is still the same. It's still the same need, the same wish to be satisfied, to be happy and not to suffer. So we've done that. And then the fifth aspect of the practice, that is part of equalizing ourselves with others, seeing that we're equal. Well, that brings in, of course, emptiness. So from the point of view of other sentient beings, lack inherent existence just as we do. The Buddha doesn't exist inherently. I myself don't exist inherently. Other sentient beings don't exist inherently. And for that, well, we've studied, of course, Chandrakirti's text. There's a lot of inspiration to be taken from there. Then you have, of course, the Bodhisattva's way of life, to find inspiration in the words of Shantideva. So, for instance, Shantideva says, and this is, I don't know what translation this is, I'm just reading from my notes. So, by becoming accustomed to the equality of self and others, bodhicitta will become firm. Self and others are dependently established. They are folds, as in like don't exist the way they appear, like this shore and the other shore, this and that, long and short. That's not what it says. That's just me adding to it. So they're folds like this shore and the other. That shore is not itself. It's not itself the other shore. In relation to someone else, it is this shore, or to something else, it is this shore. The self is not established in and of itself. In relation to someone else, it is other. So to think as in like sense of equality, to remember, well, this is I from my perspective, but from the perspective of another person, it is other. Therefore, equal in the sense, well, that will sentient beings, of course, lack inherent existence, their mind, their body, they themselves as persons, as living beings. However, on top of that, also the fact that I look after my own happiness, I, the sense of self, well, from their perspective, it's I, it's self, and therefore, and that will be the next step then, which you won't be doing for this coming week, but just where the practice is leading to. Therefore, well, we should work towards their well-being in the same way as we do, as we work for our own well-being. We are concerned, just as we're concerned for our own well-being, we should generate the same concern for others. But before we get there, to just reflect on whatever we've understood in terms of emptiness, in particular, becoming aware of the fact that I and others, well, it's just a matter of perspective. And this is not inherently I, and others, of course, are not inherently others. It's just a different perspective from a different type of mind. All right, so that's for the coming week. And then I received a question from Jimmy. Then just before class started, received another message in which she said, don't ask this question, it's taking too much time, but I still want to read his question because I think it's important. The debate continues with the Chitta Matra basically in his question, and I think it's very good. I think it's very helpful, and I'm very grateful for his input. And of course, if any of you would like to ask questions, you're always welcome. Anyway, so I'm not going to read his whole question, but remember we had this discussion last time about, well, if the Chitta Matra school, so Jimmy feels very strongly about the Chitta Matra school and saying why, what is the exact reason why is it being refuted? And so one reason I gave last time was that it's difficult, first of all, from the point of view of like, why is this my body? If it's just my body appears to different people, to myself and other people, and just due to the imprints ripening, and therefore, well, it appears slightly differently, but what is it that makes me think it's my body? And the same goes with cause and effect. You remember, as I talked about it last time, if you only see the smoke, you don't see the fire. In what way can you say every smoke is preceded by fire if no one has ever seen that fire? So how can we say it exists? And his response is basically, conventionally, it does. Yes, that is usually in a debate situation. For instance, if I were to answer like a Chitta Matra person, that's what I would say. But actually, that's a Madhyamika answer. It exists conventionally. It's by way of convention. It's known to the world, or it's labeled and so forth. So that's much more a Madhyamika answer. And then I would argue, well, if you see it that way, and let's say, okay, we take conventional existence, well, then let's say conventionally things exist externally. So if in actuality, the way I just described, fire doesn't have to be preceded by, smoke doesn't have to be preceded by fire. Why? Because because it's just due to the ripening of imprints, and if the imprint hasn't ripened, then there is no appearance of fire, and still there cause and effect. Well, if that's just by convention, I could say conventionally things exist externally, and there we are back at the Prasangika. But anyway, Jimmy's original suggestion was, well, let's accept the Chittamatra school, that everything is just the mind. But while accepting that part of the Chittamatra school, we accept the lack of inherent existence and dependent arising as described by the Prasangika. Well, simply said, that is already Prasangika school. That's no longer Chittamatra. So the moment, because Chittamatra, besides the fact that they say phenomena don't exist externally, but a very important aspect of the Chittamatra school is is inherent existence and a limited assertion with regard to dependent arising, basically just dependence on causes and conditions, but no dependence on parts. That's not set forth in their scriptures. Likewise, dependence on labeling, that type of dependence is not asserted. So if you bring this in, you've got Prasangika. If you deny inherent existence, intrinsic existence, is really the Prasangika school. Now, saying that phenomena, but he makes this argument. Oh, actually, one thing he says here, and it will come later, but he says he says, I'm looking forward to hear about how a ceased cause can cause, so a cause that's already, it's no longer there, can still cause a result. So he's basically arguing, if you're saying in the Chittamatra school, there's no way to explain when you have the appearance of smoke due to an imprint ripening, but if previously no imprint ripened with regard to fire, well, then you would have to say there's no smoke that is preceded by fire. Well, in the same way, he's arguing when you have a result, well, that result was created by a cause that no longer exists, or you have a cause that does no longer exist at the time of the result, but that still causes the result. Well, that's not true. It's true that at the time of a result, the cause no longer exists. But when the cause no longer exists, it doesn't cause anything. It's non-existent. So when does the cause give rise to something? When does it cause something? During the time when it exists. So when the seed exists, it causes the result. It gives rise to the result, the sprout, although the sprout doesn't exist at that time yet, but it's being produced. Right? It's the production is happening. So we label it's being produced on the basis of the cause doing something, which eventually, when the cause is no longer there, has given rise to the result. So we say the cause at the time of its existence gives rise to a result, which when is it there? Well, when the cause is no longer there. Okay, so therefore, a ceased cause, a no longer existent cause, does not cause anything. The cause does only do so while it's still existent. So first of all, I wanted to clarify that. Anyway, then Jimmy goes on to say, well, actually, the idea of smoke and fire, well, he believes there is no actual smoke and fire. There's just the appearance of gray color. But yes, there's the Prasangika school also says something. I mean, it says the same thing. There's the appearance of something to the mind, and we label smoke. Of course, not just randomly. There's the appearance of, well, I have to use the word smoke here now, but it's actually the color, the shape of what we call smoke. It performs the function of what is described as smoke. And on the basis of what my eye consciousness, for instance, perceives when I see the smoke billowing over the mountains or coming from my neighbor's house. So it's just that appearance. Based on that, I label smoke. And I label it, of course, based on my experience. I'm not just labeling on some kind of hallucination, but actually on conventionally existent smoke. Although what's appearing to the mind is just a shape and a color. I totally agree with him. However, Based on that, I label smoke. There is therefore conventional smoke. I've correctly labeled. So there's conventional smoke. And based on that, I can now infer, well, that there was fire. So here he says this is not a correct reason, because in actuality, that the smoke is not a correct reason, because really what you see is not smoke, you just see its shape and color. And yes, that's of course what the Prasangika school says. Based on what appears to you, we label, or what appears to our mind, we label. All right. Then he goes on to say, anyway, he continues with this argument, well, in actuality, we all see something different. Yes, that's true. He's saying, like, looking at myself, at Kelsang Wangmo, when you look at Kelsang Wangmo, everyone sees something different, and we all agree that we have something, we see something that is a common object, but in actuality, we all see something different. That is true for the Chittamatra, but that's also true for the Prasangika. The Chittamatra, if you study it step by step, introduces you to that idea. And that's also taken on by the Prasangika school. So in the Chittamatra school, it says when you really analyze what everyone sees, well, in the case of everyone having the ripening, like, an imprint ripens when you see my face, for instance, the Chittamatra school would say, an imprint ripens in your mind, and based on that, all of you perceive my face, right? So that would be the reason, according to the Chittamatra school, why do you see my face? Because right now, as you're looking at the computer screen, or, well, you don't see my actual face because you just see an image in the computer, but like, even if you were right in front of me, you would look at my face and you would all agree that you're seeing my face. So that is where, based on labeling, we label Kelsang Wangmo's face. But what you see in actuality is totally unique to each one of you. This is not just what the Chittamatra school says, this is also what the Prasangika school says. Of course, your mind sees something different, you're in a different place. It's not the same for everyone. It's never identical, it's always different. And still, we talk about seeing something in common. And so this is true for all the schools. I mean, definitely for the Chittamatra and for the Madhyamika school, including the Prasangika. And so we believe we're all seeing the same thing. That's due to ignorance, that we believe there's this objective face of Kelsang Wangmo out there, and we're just all seeing it. But that's, of course, not the case. It's because there is mind that all of this exists. So mind only, if you take just, not explain it from the point of view of the philosophical school as described in the scriptures, that definitely holds on to inherent existence. Well, mind only, there's a certain degree of mind only, well, with all the schools, of course, the Prasangika, very much so. And I've said this on a few occasions, when we discuss the Chittamatra school as part of our studies, for instance, in order then to move on to the Prasangika or the Madhyamika school, well, like I said, we never refute the Chittamatra to a degree to which we may believe we will do so, in the sense that there's so many aspects of the Chittamatra we continue to hold on to. Of course, not inherent existence. We don't hold on to inherent existence or even true existence. All that, no, we refute. But if you just think of the example of a bowl of liquid, when a human being looks at this bowl, and this is also part of the Chandrakirti's text, we discussed it before. When three beings look at for instance, some liquid, to a human being, that liquid appears as water, may appear as water, it doesn't always have to be, but in certain circumstances, it's possible that you have three people, a human being, a celestial being, and a preta being, look at something that they would probably commonly agree to as being a form of liquid. All right, so they have something in common, but a human being would see water, a preta being would see pus and blood, and a celestial being would see ambrosia, would see a form of nectar, long life nectar. And so why is that? Because it's due to the karma, the karmic imprints of sentient beings, that the world appears differently to their mind. So you would still say conventionally, there's a bowl of water. But when you analyze, it becomes very clear. It appears to everyone because of their imprint. So it's very much the Chittamatra school, where there's really nothing independently there that exists independent of the imprints we've left on our mind due to the karma we've created. So if it's true for this bowl of water for us as humans, everything we perceive as humans is also a result. And I'm saying also because, of course, there are other causes and conditions, but one very important cause for us to see what we see is the karma we created in the past. That accounts for what we see all around us. And so if we talk about conventionally this and conventionally that, well, although it seems to be totally independent on the mind, well, we say it does exist externally, but we never go as far. So conventionally, it exists externally, just as conventionally the mind exists, conventionally objects, they appear as externally existent, and that does not contradict their existence in that they lack inherent existence. So we don't conventionally accept anything that goes into the direction of independent or inherent existence that far, but saying that they exist externally, there is no contradiction. It doesn't contradict. They're still very much dependent on the mind. It's due to the imprints we've left on our mind. It's due to labeling. I mean, phenomena are merely labeled according to the Prasangika school. And so again, if you didn't have a mind, you didn't have these objects. So it is a type of mind only, if you like, just using that term as a, like, it's just being, there's really mainly mind responsible for the existence of something. If you use the term in that way, well, yeah, it's mind only. But of course, we've explained mind only in a different way. And so this explanation, the latter explanation, the Prasangika explanation, does not qualify to be called mind only. All right, there's a little bit more to it, but I think I can do this another time. Let me just quickly go through it. It talks about this common appearance. Oh, and he also talks about that's Abhidharma. Yeah. Anyway, I think I've talked about that before. That's like his previous question. I just kind of put them in my notes, copied them both on my notes. So anyway, last time, yes, we talked about Abhidharma, but Abhidharma Kosha. Anyway, but that's different, so I don't need to go into that. I hope to some degree that has answered his question, Jimmy's question. His question was answered. Of course, you should check with someone who is better qualified to answer these questions. And it's always good to ask more than one person in general, and definitely someone who's more qualified. But I still thought it was important, the whole doubt he has, the discussion we got to. It is important to really understand the difference between these philosophical schools, and the Chittamatra school is so helpful in gaining a better understanding of the importance of the mind with regard to our experiences. All right, and so Jimmy, please, if you have more discussions, more debate, please go ahead and ask further. All right, so that's this much. That's the question that I got. And then let's go back to the text. We got to verse 163, I believe. What time is it? Yep. Okay. 163. There it is. So here, the heading, if you like, of this particular verse is how understanding that the self exists as a dependently labeled, dependently imputed or designated I or designated self, of understanding that helps us to also overcome other wrong perceptions when it comes to, well, the self, for instance. So we've had this many times, we've talked about this before, that of course the root ignorance, that root misapprehension that we all have, which is diametrically opposed to reality, which is an innate mind, we're born with this, that type of mind gives rise to lots of other wrong views, lots of other misapprehensions when it comes to reality. Now, usually when you hear the word misapprehension, it seems like it's a wrong view, and that's true. Usually, I mean, it's the case that this brute ignorance when it comes to the self or other phenomena as well, here it mentions the self, so that gives rise to many other wrong views. But in fact, actually, when we say wrong view, here there's something about the word. So there's a wrong view and there's a wrong consciousness. A wrong view, the Tibetan word is a different one. A wrong view and a wrong consciousness. A wrong view is always a wrong consciousness in that it misapprehends something. It wrongly apprehends something. And again, we're here looking at a mind, of course, that's not just not knowing, but that actively misapprehends its object. That's diametrically opposed to what it perceives. All right, so a wrong consciousness and a wrong view. A wrong view is always a wrong consciousness, but a wrong consciousness is not necessarily called a wrong view, because actually every afflictive emotion, every affliction, whether it be anger or attachment, jealousy, the view that phenomena that are actually impermanent are permanent, the view that, well, things don't change, the view that that which is in the nature of suffering is in the nature of happiness, all those are afflictive emotions or afflictions. I shouldn't use the word emotions. So all of those are delusions or afflictions, and they all arise from the root misapprehension. But here we distinguish, there's this distinction when you have a delusion, you have delusions that are views and delusions that are not views. So afflictions that are views, certain wrong views, and you have delusions that are not wrong views. So usually they're just divided into those two. Delusions that are views and delusions that are non-views. Non-views, I think in English you would call emotions, emotional states. So you have delusions that are emotions and delusions that are wrong views. Why that distinction? Well, because there are certain delusions, certain afflictions, of course, that we would call in English emotions. Of course, what is an emotion? It's hard to define. But anger, it's an emotion. Anger, attachment, envy, arrogance, those are emotions. Those are emotions versus wrong views. So a wrong view is that which holds, for instance, an experience, an ordinary experience to be in the nature of happiness, so an ordinary suffering experience. If I, for instance, believe that, I don't know, going shopping is true happiness, well, then that is the case of a wrong view, that is an affliction, but it's not an emotion. Of course, it's connected to attachment, connected to clinging, etc. But it itself is described as a wrong view. There's no emotional aspect to it. It's like this, it's not like that, and it's a wrong view. But attachment, for instance, like attachment to going shopping, so that's a different type of mind where you attach to, you wish for something. I guess the emotional aspect is kind of like wanting something. With anger is wanting to be removed from another person, or at least, well, if you have aversion, for instance, you want to be away from that person, or anger or hatred would lead to wanting to harm that person. So it's like this wishing type of mind. Envy, it's like, you wish for something, you wish something to have something for yourself, and you wish for someone else not to have it. So that would be the emotion of envy. Arrogance, it's also like wishing to be seen as better, as something greater, as wishing to put yourself before others, as thinking you're just superior. Anyway, so there's always this kind of wishing aspect, whereas a wrong view doesn't have that. So I believe this is kind of the distinction. So in the scriptures, it just says, delusions that are views and delusions that are non-views. And non-views are, as I just mentioned, anger, attachment, and so forth. So more emotional states. Anyway, they're all wrong consciousnesses. So attachment is a wrong consciousness. It's not called a view, but it's still wrong with regard to its object. What it perceives doesn't exist because it exaggerates. In the case of anger, it exaggerates the negative aspects of a person. It focuses on, well, first of all, on a person that, well, an inherently existent person, definitely not a conventional person, but an inherent person, and exaggerates the negative aspects of that person, kind of sees that negativity, and I guess you could say that person and that negativity as inseparable, which is unrealistic. And anyway, the negative aspect of that person is exaggerated. Therefore, its object doesn't exist. What our anger perceives, its object doesn't exist. So it's a wrong consciousness, except it's just not called a wrong view because it's not a view. And the same goes for attachment. It exaggerates whatever we attach to. So when I'm saying when the attachment is there, when you rise from that attachment and you're looking at the same object, that appearance doesn't rise. But from that attachment, when the attached mind is there, and oftentimes it's just there for a few seconds, it gives rise to another mind, then that mind of attachment comes back, and so forth. So when there's attachment, that attached mind, again, it exaggerates what's actually there. So in that sense, our root, so when I'm saying this, the reason I'm actually explaining this is that our root misapprehension gives rise to all these delusions, to all these afflictions, emotions and views, afflicted emotions and afflicted views. And all of those are wrong views. So basically, if we get rid of this root misapprehension that gives rise to all the other delusions, well, we get rid of all these other views, these wrong views and these wrong consciousnesses, these wrong, well, all the afflictive emotions, since they're all wrong consciousnesses. All right. Anyway, here, verse 163 doesn't go into all the different types of emotions. It doesn't even mention them, but they're all wrong consciousnesses anyway. They're perceiving something that doesn't exist. All right, but here it just mentions a view. It's saying if we really understand emptiness, we get rid of all these views and we get rid of all these afflicted emotions as well, of course. So if we get rid of it, it can help us at least first we understand, when we understand emptiness, initially we come to understand it, our understanding gets deeper, it becomes clearer and so forth. And the greater our understanding, the more these wrong views will be reduced. Okay, here just views mentioned, but of course the other emotions will be reduced as well. So a good sign, if you wonder, am I getting the object of negation? Am I getting closer? Do I have a better sense? Am I doing it right? Very easy test. Are you becoming a nicer person, basically? I mean, are you less self-centered, less angry, less attached? That's the best way to check, because any type of correct understanding should reduce these wrong views, as mentioned in 163, but also, of course, anger, attachment, envy, and so forth. All that should also be reduced. All right, and you just have to give it time. Don't be impatient. I mean, it takes some time, of course. All right, but what 163 is telling us, well, once we understand that the self is just designated on the aggregates, it doesn't exist as a real entity, we can also come to understand that it's not immutable, not unchanging, and that it's not inherently mutable. I told you last time there's a not extra in the second line. It's not in the commentary in Thupten Jinpa's commentary. He translated, of course, the Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. In there, the not that is here in the second line is not mentioned. So it's definitely in this commentary, it's not mentioned. It's in the root text. That's also part of the illuminating the intent when he just quotes the root text. But in the actual commentary, then by Lama Tsongkhapa is no longer there. So from there it becomes clear. It's a spelling mistake. It's a typo. Anyway, so what it says here is that we have a sense that the self doesn't change. That's also coming from the wrong view, of course, that the self exists inherently. That gives rise to a sense the self doesn't change. So we may have that view, and so if we understand how the self really exists, we can easily get rid of the sense that the self is unchanging. But also we may have the sense that, yeah, the I is changing, but it's inherently changing, and there's an inherent change taking place. There's some intrinsic changing essence, or whatever you want to call it. And again, that of course is refuted. So what would it mean if the I exists inherently and it would still change? Well, it could only be that the aggregates are the I, because a separate I wouldn't make sense at all. So therefore, it would have to be the aggregates, and the aggregates were the I, and they were changing and inherently doing so. Then there'd be these totally unrelated moments, moment to moment, these totally disconnected moments. And there would be no way of saying the I is changing. What is it? There's just these disconnected moments of aggregates. So this is what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying in his commentary. So therefore, if we understand the I is merely labeled, we also understand it's not inherently it's not inherently changing. It does not inherently arise, nor inherently disintegrate. Okay, so when we say the self arises and the self disintegrates, it's just labeled. There's no intrinsic, there's no findability of the I arising and the I disintegrating. So arising as the I of this life and then disintegrating at the time of death, for instance, just labeled. And again, that wrong view is reduced initially and eventually be totally eliminated. It possesses no attributes like permanence and so on. So permanence in a way was already explained, but maybe permanence could also be taken of existing eternally. Of course, the I does exist eternally, not in the form of the I of this life, but, well, the mind exists forever, will always exist, eventually become the enlightened mind of a Buddha, but still continues to exist. The mind exists, continues to exist. And with the basis of imputation of the I, as one of the bases is the mental consciousness. If that continues, well, the I continues. Therefore, it's eternal, if you like. So permanence, if you explain permanence in the sense of eternity, well, it doesn't exist inherently as permanent. Okay, so of course it is permanent in that sense that it exists. I mean, the commentary doesn't explain that it means eternity, but since you had already changeability or the changing nature before, it could also be explained in that way. Though I'm not sure. I just don't know why I'm one way. Well, actually, immutable, to be more precise, the word in Tibetan is actually stable or unstable. So it's not really mutable or immutable, but it can be used, it can be translated that way. And anyway, what gives rise to it arises or disintegrate. Or he's just saying these are all the same views, basically. So immutable, arising and disintegrating, this all refers to impermanence in the classical sense of like changing moment by moment. But anyway, we have lots of wrong views when it comes to permanence and impermanence, and definitely once you understand how the self exists, those views will also slowly disappear and eventually completely be abandoned. And of course, in the last line of 163, it says it has no existence in terms of identity or difference. So it's neither one nor different with the aggregate. So all these views will be eliminated once you eliminate the wrong view with regard to the ultimate nature of the I. And of course, all the other afflictive emotions. Yes, so that's 163. And then 164, Chandrakirti says, now it identifies the self. So the heading is the self that is the basis of bondage. What is this I that is the basis for our bondage, for our being caught in samsara, and likewise the basis for the freedom from ignorance and so forth. So what is that actual I? Well, the I that is merely labeled on this basis, on the basis of the aggregates, mind and body. Just a sec. So basically, yes. So on the basis of those, just a sec. All right. So on the basis of the fact that so the I doesn't exist inherently, and so therefore the thought grasping at an I arises constantly in beings, and associated with thoughts grasping at mind arise. So here is really saying, basically, he's saying that, well, there's different ways in which this is explained, but it brings the two together. It brings the misapprehension of the I and the correct way in which the I exists. It brings those two together in this verse. So on this thought, grasping at an I. So the moment you have the word grasping, it means, of course, grasping at inherent existence. That arises constantly in beings, in ordinary beings, and associated with this thoughts, grasping at mine arise. So that's how ordinarily, for an ordinary person, based on the wrong view of reality, on the misapprehension of self and other phenomena, you have grasping at an I, you have grasping at that which is mind. So the basis for that, what is the basis for that misapprehension? That is a self that exists as a convention, unanalyzed due to delusion. So as a basis for all this, and this is what the heading tells us, the basis of bondage and freedom. So based on that, then this misapprehension arises, and unanalyzed, well, that then gives rise to the different kinds of delusions. All right. Okay, let me check whether I've forgotten something. No. So this is basically for humans, for animals, for all sentient beings. We innately have that sense, well, due to the imprints of the wrong view, the imprints of our misapprehension. It appears that way, and then we hold on to it to be the case. But the basis for that, of course, is the existent I. That's 164. And then it says in the next verse, in verse 165, well, it tells us that if we negate the inherently existent I, we also negate an inherently existent mind. Now, when you hear this, you go, yeah, of course, but it's important to go through this within the state of meditation, to really meditate on this, to take it to this level where you don't just superficially go, oh yeah, that makes sense, I've understood that. But no, take it more to an emotional level in understanding, well, first of all, distinguishing between I and mine. Okay, this is an important aspect of self-grasping. Many of you have heard of a particular type of mind that's mentioned again and again. It's called the view of the transitory collection. The view of the transitory collection. That is not just self-grasping. It's a particular type of mind that is, of course, perceives inherent existence, however, based on the I. Based on the I. And I'm not saying another person's I, because another person's I, when I grasp at the inherent existence of another person, a person other than myself, when I grasp at the inherent existence of a person other than myself, that is not called the view of the transitory collection. It is self-grasping. It's grasping at a self, not myself, another self, as existing inherently. So remember, I talked about the root ignorance can be divided into root ignorance that perceives the self to be existing inherently and phenomena other than the self to exist inherently. Now, you can divide this self, the first type, the misapprehension that grasps at the inherent existence of the self, into two again. That misapprehension, that is the transitory, the view of the transitory collection, and any other self-grasping. So in other words, the view of the transitory collection means specifically Jigda in Tibetan, Jigtso or Jigda. This is the literal translation, the view of the transitory collection. So that type of mind focuses, as I just said, on me existing inherently, not on another person. When I focus on another person as existing inherently, that's not the view of the transitory collection, but it is a view that perceives the inherent existence of a self. All right. Why do we distinguish? Well, obviously, because it's all about well, of all the phenomena that we perceive to be inherently existent, mainly we focus on the I. So that is, it's hard to say it's stronger. No, we perceive all phenomena equally as inherent existence, but still on an emotional level, well, it gives rise to self-cherishing. And it doesn't, we never cherish anything as strongly as we cherish the I. So we cherish other things, of course, but only if they're mine. Okay, my friend, my family, my child, and so forth. So mine comes in there as well. But first, let's explain the view of the transitory collection. Well, why is it called that? Well, that's just a name really given on the basis of what's the transitory collection? It's the collection of mind and body. The collection of mind and body on the basis of that, on the basis of my mind. Okay, what happens when you have your own transitory collection? Well, your mind observes your mind and body. Then there's just a neutral mind perceiving mind and body, and then labels I. And then due to our imprints, due to the imprints we've left on the mind since beginning of time, well, first the I appears, of course. But when you label, the I appears to the mind, and it appears to exist inherently. And then that appearance gives rise to holding on to it, the inherent existence of the I, of my own I. All right, that's just label, but I hold on to. There's a certain type of mind after you've labeled correctly. Due to the appearance of the I existing inherently, the mind holds on to the inherent existence of the mind, believes or holds on to the I existing in and of itself as a findable entity. And that is called the view of the transitory collection, because it's focusing on myself. And then based on that comes the view of mine. All right, so there's an I, which now becomes the owner, if you like, that which holds on to my body, my mind. That's the most, well, that's the most immediate, if you like. So most immediately you're looking at my body, and then by extension my clothes, my family. Of course, we're usually born into a family, so my family, my parents, my siblings, my accommodation, my house, my bed, and so forth. So based on that, then there's mine, and again, holding on to the inherent existence of that. That is also described as the view of the transitory collection, where you perceive not only I existing inherently, but also mine. So when you perceive mine to exist inherently, you automatically also perceive I to exist inherently. It goes one way, not necessarily the other way. When you perceive the I, my own self, to exist inherently, you don't necessarily perceive that which is mine to exist inherently. But when you perceive that which is mine to exist inherently, you perceive also that which makes it mine, the I, to exist inherently. That always happens in the same mind. So when you perceive mine, and I'm not just saying perceiving something that happens to me mine, that's different. So perceiving, for instance, a table, which is actually my table. No, it has to be this mine. This is my table. And that kind of ownership existing inherently. And with that, you're right away, you're holding on to the I existing inherently. That is the view of the transitory collection. So either it just perceives the I as existing inherently, myself to exist inherently, or that which I perceive to be owned by this I. All right, my I, or owned is, for lack of a better word, I mean, certain things I would say I own, but to say I own my parents, that's no, it's not meant that way. Yes, of course. Who's that?
Yeah, it's Varda. It's
Varda.
just because I don't understand if the self-transitory collection is based on the I, why is the other one called self-grasping ignorance?
So you're saying that if I hold on to Varda's inherent existence, why is that self-grasping ignorance? Are you asking that? If I perceive my own self?
No, if you say that transitory collection is grasping at the I,
my own I,
and my own I, then why is the other
self-grasping
is called self-grasping ignorance? If the transitory is on I, why does the other is called self-grasping ignorance and not other grasping ignorance? Others grasping ignorance.
Well, this distinction is not made, as usually when we differentiate between the ignorance that grasps at the I and the ignorance that grasps at other phenomena, then other phenomena does not refer to a person. It refers to any phenomenon other than a person, other than a living being, right?
Why is it called self-grasping?
So self, as in like every person is a self. Yourself, right? We say themselves. So actually in our everyday kind of, in English, you would also say they have done this to themselves. So it implies that it's also a self, right?
So it's not the other person grasping at the self, it's the self-grasping.
It is grasping at the self of the other person as existing inherently.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Varda. That's good to clarify that. Yeah, I'm glad that you asked this question, because hopefully now it's clear for everyone. Thank you. All right. So having said this, having given you that explanation, and it's not directly related to this verse, but I feel it helps to understand this verse a little better. So here it's talking about the transitory collection when there is no when there's no agent, the object of action is no more. So here's really saying, well, we believe there to be an inherently existent I, and in this case, of course, the I here, myself. So when I understand that I doesn't exist inherently, then the next step is that mine, right? Because oftentimes we're so attached. We have a sense, I'm not so attached to myself. I'm really attached to other people. Of course, we actually have a very strong self-attachment, but there's less of this fear of losing. There's no fear of losing myself. At the time of death, that fear arises, but we're really scared of maybe losing other people. If we have children, if we have people that are really close to us, maybe our parents when they're sick, and we have this fear of losing them, then there's a strong sense, oh, I'm really attached to mine, in the sense my parents, and less of a sense attached to myself. But definitely when it comes down to losing ourselves, the attachment will be extremely strong. But the point I'm trying to make is, once we understand this I doesn't exist inherently, then the I as the owner, and the Tibetan word actually for I or for self is owner. Da is kind of the same as like Dakpo means owner in Tibetan. Da is self, so it has kind of the same syllable. It's like it's part of it's kind of the main syllable of the word owner. So it implies owning conventionally mind and body, if you like, or other things. So that's another word for self. Anyway, the point is, of course, if I understand the I doesn't exist inherently, then my attachment towards other things, first holding onto the inherent existence of my parents, my this, my that will loosen, and therefore our attachment too, right? So I gives rise to attachment to the self, and due to this, it then gives rise to attachment to that which is mine, which means that which my parents, my this, and so forth. All right. Okay. And so the other way around, if I can remove when it comes to the I, so if I just perceive the lack of an inherently existent table, which happens to be mine, that's different. But when I perceive this table to be mine and perceive it as being mine inherently existent, well, that's when I have a case of the transitory collection. And this can be removed if I first understand the lack of inherent existence of myself. All right, so this is what this is saying. Sorry, that was a little bit complicated. So when there's no agent, the object of action is no more, so mind cannot be there. So mind cannot be if there is no I. Thus, viewing the I and mind to be empty, yogis will attain total freedom. Right? So that's easy to be understood, the rest of it. So of course, it also refers to other phenomena, not just I and mind, but it's obvious why those two are so important. All right, that's 165. And then it goes on to say, and this is true not just for the I. We focus so much on the I. We even give the view of the transitory collections gets a separate name. I mean, I don't have a separate name for self-grasping with regard to my neighbor or with regard to my friends or my relatives, all self-grasping, right? But when it comes to the I, there's a special term. So it is kind of separated out, being given that term. But of course, everything we've had about the I is true for vases, woolen cloth, shields, armies, forests, garlands, trees. Well, anyway, vases. You've probably noticed by now that a very popular example, when you give an example for something like just an object that you can perceive, it's vases. Vases, all right. So we've got vases around in our house, of course, possibly. Then woolen cloth. I mean, well, Tibetans definitely wore woolen cloth. In India, yeah, well, in some areas they wore woolen cloth. So cloth, that's merely labeled. Vases are merely labeled woolen cloth. Shields, well, yeah, we still have armies, so body armor, or I don't know, knee paddies or whatever, something to shield you. Armies, merely labeled. Forests, oh, lots of examples of forests. Sherwood Forest, the Amazon rainforest. I mean, lots of forests that are merely labeled. Garlands, well, or rosaries. Sometimes it's translated as like rosary, jewelry, like, I don't know, necklaces and so forth, or basically just garlands. Trees, of course, every tree is merely labeled on the basis of its parts: oak tree, pine tree, palm tree, and so forth. Houses, of course, lots of houses merely labeled. Cards or cars. Rest houses like guest houses, hotels, and all such things. So basically everything all around us. The objects we use, the objects we wear, the objects we use to protect ourselves, shields and armies, the objects we get our food and other important sustenance from, forests, the things that we, well, trees as well, then what we ornament as, like what we wear as like an ornament, and so forth. So basically it's just saying everyday life, everyday kind of objects we need for our daily life. And to remember as part of this, and we of course should be aware that this text is meant, of course, for us to meditate on these ideas and now to apply everything we've learned, moving away from, of course, the car, the chariot, the car, and the I and mind, towards everything else around us, all the objects around us that people designate based on their basis. Know these likewise. So that these are just labeled, the I is just labeled, these objects are too, and they're merely labeled. The Buddha, for one, did not quarrel with the world. Okay, that's this really famous quote, of course, that's given, that the Buddha doesn't quarrel with the world quarrels with the Buddha. Okay, that's actually in the commentary. I'm just trying to find it. That's 166, should be here. Yes. Yes, in the Presenting the Three Vows Sutra, where it says, in the world, it is the world that disputes with me. The Buddha himself said, I do not dispute with the world. All right. So he's basically saying, I have no problem. I mean, of course, in the way, of course, he says there's no inherent existence. But most people, if you ask them, do things exist inherently or not, they don't even know what you're talking about. They have no idea what it actually means. Of course, it's so difficult to identify the object of negation. There's a reason for that. So don't even know what you're talking about. Just inherent existence and existence seem the same thing. So that the Buddha denies. But as of conventions, this is a car, this is a vase, this is a woolen cloth, this is a cotton cloth, what have you. As to when it comes to that, the Buddha didn't quarrel with the world when it comes to conventions. All right. And of course, certain other aspects, such which is, impermanence and the phenomena that are permanent or not, are actually phenomena that are actually impermanent, perceiving them as permanent. All right, there's that quarrel, definitely. There's that dispute. But what the Buddha means is like just ordinary conventions, just ordinary objects, the Buddha has no problem with. And then he goes on to say the parts, qualities, attachment, defining characteristics, fuel, and so on. The whole, quality bearer, object of attachment, the characterized fire, and so on, none of these exist inherently when subjected to sevenfold chariot analysis. So the parts, in the first line it says the parts, in the second line the whole. So those are dependent on each other. A part is a part in dependence on a whole, and a whole is a whole in dependence on parts. Qualities, and then quality bearer. So far it seemed, well, quality is only a quality if you have a quality bearer. But of course, we've had that before, but it goes both ways. And attachment, you need to have an object of attachment. Okay. So to go back to this discussion between mind only, strictly mind only, and prasangika, something to do with what the discussion with Jimmy today. Oh, I need to stop here. But anyway, so with Jimmy, the discussion we had, what does the Chittamatra school says? The Chittamatra school, there's more of an emphasis on the mind. Everything is dependent on the mind. There's less emphasis on the objects of the mind being, not only are the objects of the mind dependent on the mind, but the mind is also dependent on the objects. You don't have that emphasis. In the Prasangika school, you have that emphasis. So as this last verse, when it says attachment and object of attachment is only attachment if it has an object. So attachment is dependent on its object, and the object is dependent on the attachment. So a mind is dependent on its object, and an object is dependent on the mind. That dependence goes both ways. So of course, nothing could exist if there wasn't a mind that perceives it. Definitely the case, Chittamatra and Prasangika. But in the Prasangika school, you have the emphasis that you couldn't have a mind if you didn't have objects. Does that make sense? So that's a different. The Chittamatra school doesn't talk about like, or doesn't emphasize it in that way, saying, well, you couldn't have a mind if you didn't have an object, because it's always like mind is at the forefront. Mind is that entity, that inherent entity, and the objects only exist because of the mind. In the Prasangika, they're equally dependent on each other. This interdependence is much more stressed. All right, that should be enough for today. Let me just quickly summarize. So hopefully you didn't get too confused. Verse 164, that was the verse, it wasn't 164, it's 163. We started with that. I briefly mentioned the fact that, well, from our basic misapprehension, lots of other views arise. And included in those views are all the delusions. All the delusions are wrong consciousnesses. They're not necessarily wrong views, because we distinguish between afflictions or delusions that are views and those that are non-views. Okay, so views are their main kind of function is to just misapprehend something, but they don't have the emotional quality such as anger and attachment. So just it's like this, it's like that. That's just simply a view. But if you have this emotional aspect, such as with love, such as with attachment or anger, you have an incorrect apprehension of reality and that emotional aspect. Okay, so we talked about that in this context of verse 163. But basically what we've learned is that if we understand how phenomena really exist, especially the I, that's merely designated and so forth, well, the other views will be reduced and of course, eventually also removed. And then we've learned about the self, that is the basis of bondage. That was verse 164, just saying that, well, we misapprehend, sentient beings misapprehend the I, misapprehend mine as an exaggerated sense of I, an inherent I, and an inherent mine. But the basis for that is the merely conventional I, the merely conventional I that is unanalyzed, not analyzed with wisdom. Wisdom is not applied. Ultimate analysis is not applied. And that is due to our delusion, or here the word really is ignorance, due to our ignorance. So on the basis of a conventional I, then we misapprehend ourselves, that which is mine, and everything else. That's what verse 164 tells us. 165 tells us, well, once we understand that the I, my own my I mean, that which is the basis, or that which is the object of the transitory collection, the view of the transitory collection, well, once we understand that doesn't exist inherently, well, we understand that mind doesn't exist inherently either. And of course, from their attachment and so forth towards that which is mine, of course, will also be reduced and eventually eliminated. And this is where our freedom comes in. Freedom is this internal freedom, of course, freedom from attachment. There's nothing to be attached to. I, mine, those are the objects. That's what we hold on to when we're attached. And of course, in relation to, if it's not I and mine, but definitely attached to things in connection to those two. If it's just for my happiness, we're holding on to something. And once that is gone, well, our attachment will go as well. 165, and then 166 and 167, we'll discuss 167 in more detail, but it's just telling us now apply it to everything else. This is true for our daily life objects, houses and armies and forests and so forth. And of course, 167, it's also describing this interrelationship or interdependence, which we'll go more into next time. Great, that was enough. I went a little bit longer today. Anyway, let's now meditate on what we've learned today. I have a few moments of just letting go of any disruptive thoughts. Just focus your breathing. Focus on the breath. Now fast. Try to become aware of your own view of the transitory collection. That is the mind that perceives yourself and that which is yours to exist inherently. Become aware of your sense that the I is not just labeled on mind and body, but that it exists above and beyond that. And then become aware of that appears to your mind. That you also have a sense of the inherent mind. My body. My happiness. My money. My house. My family. My job. And it also gives rise to the view that the I is immutable, unchanging. We don't have the sense that the I is changing moment by moment. Or that mind is changeable. We have a sense that the I is either totally separate from mind or body, or the same as the I, or the same as mind and body. We also hold the wrong view that the I is more precious. And that mine is therefore more precious too. And once I realize that there is no inherent I, that the I is merely labeled, and that mine is just designated or labeled. And all these misapprehensions will disappear too. The view that the I is unchanging, that mine is unchanging. And that I and mine are at the center of the universe. I and mine, as we perceive them, are just exaggerations of the basis, which is the conventional, merely labeled I. And if we can remove or understand that the I doesn't exist inherently, we understand that mine lacks inherent existence too. And therefore let go of our attachment towards mine. It is so important to pay more attention to I and mine and understand its actual mode of existence. The fact that it's merely labeled mind and body. But then we need to also apply our knowledge, our understanding to all the other objects around us. To the objects we use on a daily basis. tables, chairs, clothes. The house or apartment we live in. They're merely labeled. Nothing exists in and of itself. But is labeled on its parts. With nothing to hold on to. Nothing to be attached to. And now to conclude this brief analysis, apply single-pointed concentration on whatever insight you've gained. And allow for it to sink deeper into your mind. And then let's dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated today. May this become a cause for us to quickly, for the welfare of all sentient beings, attain the state of a Buddha. And may it cause our lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Chadu Rinpoche, and so forth, to have a long and stable life and to continue to teach the pure Dharma. And may our merit also positively affect those around us, to be able to deal with the daily challenges of the 21st century. Those who are sick, like Kali Lubin, get better soon. Those who are stressed out, burned out, find inner peace and happiness. And of course, the way Shantideva describes it. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you very much. And all that remains is to remind you of your practice for this coming week. Of course, again and again, to generate the mind of enlightenment. I've said it in the beginning, but also as part of equalizing ourselves and others, to not forget the first 3 points, the importance of sentient beings for our own well-being, to not forget the fact that we're equal in terms of wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer, and then to mainly focus on, well, the fact that self and others is just labeled. It's just from the point of view of a certain perspective, that in the end, there's no inherent I, there's no inherent others. And based on that understanding that all sentient beings lack inherent existence, and that this is true for Buddhas, for ordinary sentient beings, for ourselves, which is just another reason to see the equality of all sentient beings. All right, that's it. Have a great week, and I'll see you again on Sunday, next Sunday.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Lata.
Thank you. Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Good night.
Geshe-la. Thank you.
Bye, Lata.